Welcome to a place where grief grows roots. This is FolkFear, a channel where the past is never buried deep enough and tradition is a blade that cuts both ways. Here, the stories we tell are not just tales, they are warnings etched in bone, bound in thread, and whispered beneath the earth. Tonight, we return to the field no one dares to plow, a place the locals call the Mother's Field, where sorrow feeds the soil and something ancient stirs beneath the poppies. If you've ever mourned too long or listened too closely to a lullaby in the dark, this story may feel familiar. But beware, some lullabies were never meant to soothe. Some were meant to summon. And once the cradle moves, it's already too late. They arrived on a Tuesday, when the mist had not yet lifted from the valley, and the air still smelled like rusted iron and wet bark. The village was small, no more than 24 homes, crouched low in the earth like secrets refusing to be spoken aloud. Crows circled overhead as if drawn to the new scent of sorrow in the air. Leah sat in the passenger seat, fingers curled tightly around a wilted bouquet of wildflowers. Daniel drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the empty baby seat in the back. Neither of them had spoken in hours. The GPS had long since given up. The road they followed had dissolved from pavement to gravel, and finally to a path barely wide enough for the car to squeeze through. Nature was swallowing it back, inch by inch. It felt like the forest did not want them here. But they came anyway. The cottage waited for them at the edge of the village, perched just before the land turned feral. A crooked farmhouse with a sagging roof and cracked windows, its bones creaking under the weight of old storms. Ivy clung to the sides like veins on pale skin. A small wooden sign hung on the fence, hand-painted in faded red, Ashthorn House. Daniel shut off the engine and exhaled, as if he'd been holding his breath for miles. Leah did not move. Her eyes had fixed on something just beyond the cottage. A field. Barren. Untouched. It was the only open stretch of land around, yet no crops grew there, no livestock grazed, no fences marked it for tending. It was framed by a low perimeter of black stones, each one slick with moss, and a frayed red thread that ran around it in a perfect loop, as if someone had stitched the field shut. Leah felt something tighten in her chest. "Why does it look abandoned?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel glanced toward it, then quickly looked away. "It's probably fallow, or maybe private." Leah did not respond. The flowers in her lap had started to rot. The villagers greeted them with cautious smiles and eyes that lingered a beat too long. They spoke with thick accents, voices hushed and clipped. Names were not offered, questions were deflected. But there was a politeness in their distance, the kind reserved for mourners or doomed lovers. An old man from the neighboring house brought them firewood without being asked. A pale girl left a pie on their porch, and someone, they never saw who, tied a red thread to their gatepost in the night. Leah found it in the morning, tied in a perfect loop. No beginning, no end. Inside the cottage, the air smelled of rosemary and damp stone. The walls had been recently painted, but the scent of old smoke and something more coppery still lingered beneath. There was a cradle in the upstairs room, handmade, with carvings of flowers and birds, as if someone had known a baby was coming. Daniel offered to carry it to the barn. Leah refused. She said, "Leave it there." They unpacked in silence. Grief hung in the corners like cobwebs, impossible to brush away. At night, Leah couldn't sleep. She wandered the halls barefoot, listening for a sound she couldn't name. Sometimes it felt like the house was breathing. It was 3 days before she stepped into the village center alone. There was a well, a small chapel, a post office that hadn't opened in years. Children played with rag dolls made of straw and thread. None of them spoke. All of them stared. She passed a market stall that sold only one thing: bundles of dried poppy pods strung together like rosaries. "Good for sleep and remembering," the vendor said, her voice dry as ash. Leah bought none. Instead, she found herself walking toward the field again. Always the field. Something about it pulled at her, not curiosity, something deeper, older, the way the sea pulls at someone who's already drowned. She stood at the edge, just outside the ring of stones. The red thread fluttered slightly in the breeze, though there was no wind. A lullaby floated through her mind. One she hadn't heard since childhood, one she'd never sung aloud. She turned to leave, but the soil in the center of the field, dark, undisturbed, rippled, as if something beneath it had just exhaled. That night, Daniel dreamed of a woman in white standing over his bed. She held something in her arms, not quite a baby, not quite a bundle of roots, and whispered a song in a language he didn't know. When he woke, Leah was gone from the bed. He found her standing at the window, watching the field. Her hands were trembling. "There's something wrong here," she said. He put his arms around her. "We needed to get away. We needed a place to heal." Leah nodded slowly, but she didn't stop staring. The next day, she asked one of the villagers about the field. The woman froze. Her eyes flicked toward the stones. "That land belongs to the mother. It is not to be touched." Leah frowned. "Who is the mother?" The woman only shook her head. "It is not my place to say. You are not from here." Then she pressed a bundle of red thread into Leah's hand. "For protection," she said. That evening, Leah walked to the field again. The poppies had not bloomed, not yet. The soil remained bare, quiet, waiting. She stepped closer to the edge, close enough to hear something beneath the silence. A hum, a tune, a lullaby. And this time, it was singing back. The village changed as the days passed, not in the way a place ages, but in the way something dormant begins to stir. It was subtle at first. The crows flew lower. The children stopped playing near the chapel. Windows that were once cracked open now closed with a quiet decisiveness, especially at dusk. Leah kept waking with her hands clenched, fingernails digging into her palms, as if she were holding something tight in her sleep. Something warm, something soft, something that breathed. One morning, she found a single poppy on the kitchen table, deep red, uncut, no vase, just lying there. When she asked Daniel if he'd left it, he only looked confused. They burned it in the fireplace. It didn't smell like a flower when it burned. It smelled like blood. Leah wandered to the chapel that afternoon, a stone building with no cross, no bell, no light inside. Its door creaked open with surprising ease. The air inside was dry, thick with dust and old incense. Candles had been burned to nubs along the altar, and someone had scrawled symbols in red wax along the walls. Circles, threads, a woman with an empty womb. In the center of the chapel stood a cradle. Wooden, hand-carved. The same pattern as the one in her bedroom upstairs. Flowers, birds, the curve of vines. But this one was old, weathered by time and rot, and something darker stained the inside. Leah stepped forward. Her breath hitched. There was a name carved into the side, faded by years of touch. Iskra. It wasn't her child's name, but it was the name Leah had whispered once in a dream, a name that had never come from her lips before that night. When she returned home, she found the bedroom cradle had shifted, only slightly, maybe an inch to the left. She hadn't touched it. Neither had Daniel. He told her she was imagining things. But that night, when they slept, Leah heard the floorboards creak beside the cradle, and a soft cooing sound that was not the wind. The next day, she visited the only elder who didn't flinch when spoken to. The woman's name was Luda. Her back was crooked, her hair long and white, her eyes cloudy but sharp beneath the cataracts. She lived at the edge of the woods, surrounded by jars of dried herbs and bones strung from the ceiling like wind chimes. Luda invited Leah in without a word. She'd been expecting her. "You saw the cradle," Luda rasped, grinding something in a mortar. "The first one." Leah sat slowly. "What does it mean?" "It is where the offering was made, where the mother's price was set." Leah's skin prickled. "What offering?" The old woman pointed her finger out the window, toward the field beyond the trees. "A woman, long ago, she was barren. No child would take root in her. Her belly stayed cold." Luda went to the forest, to the old place, and found a book without a spine. In it was a rite. She planted poppy seeds soaked in her own blood. She buried a cradle in the earth beneath the blood moon, and she sang. Leah's chest tightened. "And then?" "She vanished," Luda said. "But the village began to thrive. The crops, the births, no sickness, every home filled with the laughter of children." Her voice dropped, almost reverent. "But nothing is ever free. The mother is not kind. She is only hungry." Leah stared down into the tea. Floating at the surface were 3 red threads. "What happened to the woman?" she asked. "She became the field, and the field remembers." Leah dreamed of the woman that night. Pale skin, hollow belly, singing lullabies into the soil with her fingers bleeding red ribbons. A cradle in front of her, half buried, pulsing like a heartbeat. The woman turned and looked at Leah. And Leah knew it wasn't just a dream. It was a memory, but not hers. Daniel grew restless. The peace they'd hoped for was slipping away. He suggested leaving just for a few days, a hotel, a break, fresh air away from whatever strange grief was fermenting in the village. But she refused. "This is where we're meant to be," she said. He stared at her. "What are you talking about?" She blinked, confused at her own words. "I don't know. I just feel it." He didn't press her. But that night when they slept, Leah heard the floorboards creak beside the cradle and a soft cooing sound that was not the wind. The next day, she visited the only elder who didn't flinch when spoken to. A storm rolled in. Heavy clouds, no thunder, just wind that whispered through the chimney like a child crying. Leah stood by the field as the sky darkened. She held a candle in a jar, shielding it from the gusts. The stones around the field were wet with dew, but the red thread remained dry. She stepped closer than she had before. Something tugged in her chest, like a cord, a connection. Then she heard it, a lullaby, sung in her own voice, but she wasn't singing. It came from beneath the soil, and it knew her name. When she returned home, Daniel had found something in the attic, a bundle of cloth, old, moth-eaten, wrapped around a journal. Inside were pages of cramped handwriting, faded ink, and dark brown stains. It belonged to a woman named Iskra. The last page was torn, but the ink bled down the margin in a line. A lullaby. In Leah's handwriting, except she had never written it. She didn't know how it ended, and when she tried to hum it, the windows shuddered. They argued. Daniel insisted they leave. Leah told him he could go. "I need to know what this place wants," she said. He said it wasn't safe. She said neither with grief. He slept on the couch, but before moving the cradle downstairs to the barn, he locked the barn. He kept the key. And still, the next morning, the cradle was back in the bedroom, rocking, empty, and singing. It started with the needle. Leah found it on the kitchen counter, long, silver, threaded with crimson silk. She didn't remember taking it out. She didn't remember owning thread that color. But when she tried to put it away, her hand moved on its own, as if it already knew what to do. That night, she sewed, in her sleep. She didn't know how long it lasted, minutes, hours, only that she woke with the needle still in her hand, her fingers cramped, a faint stain of blood beneath each nail. Beside her pillow lay a small swatch of linen. A lullaby was stitched into it, letter by letter. Sleep now, my bloom, in mother's red bed. Sleep where the worms rock you soft in the thread. Leah dropped it. Her palms itched. There was dirt beneath her fingernails. Again. Daniel didn't believe her. Or maybe he did, but didn't want to. He'd started watching her at night, lying awake while she slept, waiting, listening. One night, just past 2 a.m., he saw her rise without a sound, eyes closed, barefoot, calm. She walked to the door and opened it, slow and gentle, like she was afraid of waking something, not him, something older. He followed her in the dark, through the field's border, past the red thread, into the center of the soil. She stood there silent, the wind tossing her nightdress around her like water. And then she knelt, both hands plunged into the dirt, and she began to hum, a lullaby, low, ancient, bone deep. The ground answered. It vibrated. Daniel felt it in his teeth, and in that moment, in the moonlight that touched nothing else but her skin and the soil, she looked less like his wife and more like a woman waiting to be devoured. The next morning, Leah remembered none of it. She looked pale, weak, but peaceful, like someone had taken something from her and left nothing painful behind. Daniel told her what he saw. She laughed. "I think I would remember burying myself in a field," she said. He didn't laugh with her. Later, he checked her feet. The soles were crusted with mud, and beneath her nails, poppy seeds. In town, the villagers had begun hanging charms, bundles of dried roots, cloth dolls with no faces, symbols stitched into grain sacks and nailed to doors. Leah asked one woman, a baker with hollow cheeks, what they were for. "To mark the time," the woman said. "It's almost the blooming." Leah tilted her head. "The blooming?" The baker nodded. "When the field remembers, when it asks." That night, Leah found poppy petals in her bed. They hadn't bloomed yet, but they had found her anyway. The dreams changed. No longer glimpses of lullabies and soil, but full memories, not hers, yet lived through her skin. She stood barefoot in a clearing under a sky of deep crimson, with a child curled in her arms made of branches and straw. Women circled her, humming. One whispered, "Plant it where it can grow." She dug with her hands. The soil was warm, wet. She lowered the cradle, a handmade one, lined with blood-soaked linen, into the earth, like burying a seed. The wind blew, and the cradle twitched. She woke gasping. The taste of copper filled her mouth. Daniel brought in a priest, an outsider, young, nervous. The villagers watched him from behind curtains, their stares heavy, accusatory. He spoke with Leah in the chapel, under the dusty, stained glass that hadn't seen sunlight in decades. He wore his collar tight, fingers clenched on his Bible. He asked her questions about dreams, about sleepwalking, about grief and possession. Leah answered them all with calm clarity. But every time she mentioned the field, the air grew colder, the candles dimmed, and the priest began to sweat. By the time he left the chapel, he was pale, shaking. He refused to enter the house again. The next day, he was gone. No one saw him leave. That night, the cradle rocked on its own. Leah lay in bed, listening. The wood creaked softly, back and forth, as though something small inside was breathing. She turned to look. Empty. Still, it rocked. She got up, walked toward it, knees trembling. The closer she came, the louder the lullaby became, but there was no sound in the room. The sound was inside her. The next morning, Leah found another stitchwork beneath her pillow. Same crimson thread, same trembling hand, but this one read, "When grief takes root, the soil will bloom. One must be lost to feed the womb." Daniel burned the cloth without a word. But even as the thread turned black, the words didn't vanish. They only sank into the smoke. He begged her to leave. She told him she couldn't, that there was something in the field calling to her. Not evil, not malicious, just lonely, empty, like her. She didn't cry when she said it. That's what scared him the most. The next morning, the cradle was gone. Not just moved, not stolen, gone, as though it had never existed at all. No marks on the floor, no scratches on the walls, only a faint indent in the dust where it had once stood, and a trail of red thread leading out the door. Daniel followed it, across the yard, through the fence, past the boundary stones, into the field. The thread stopped in the center. There in the earth, a patch of soil had been turned, fresh, dark, still damp. He knelt, dug with his hands. Inches down, his fingers touched something smooth, wood, carved with birds and flowers. It pulsed, just once. He staggered back. That night, Leah stood at the bedroom window. The moon was full, red, heavy in the sky like a weeping eye. She sang to it, softly, a lullaby. Not in her voice, but in her mother's. A lullaby she had not heard since she was a child. A lullaby no one living had sung in decades. Down in the field, the cradle moved, and the soil breathed in, like it was preparing to give birth. The poppies bloomed on the fourth Friday of spring, but they bloomed wrong. Not scattered like wildflowers, not gentle or shy. They erupted, a perfect circle in the center of the mother's field, petals thick and glistening, as if dipped in blood. They pulsed in the morning light like mouths mid-breath, trembling with something not wind. Leah was already outside when Daniel woke, barefoot, still, her eyes fixed on the circle of red. He called her name once. She didn't blink. He called it again. Nothing. Then, slowly, she stepped into the field, past the stones, over the red thread that had frayed and fallen away like loose stitches. The poppies didn't move as she entered. It was the earth itself that shifted, as though it recognized her. The villagers noticed, but said nothing. Their eyes lingered too long again, just like when the couple first arrived. Only now, their kindness was sharper, watchful. They greeted Leah with nods that held sorrow, with smiles too practiced to be comforting. They began leaving small gifts at the cottage door. Straw dolls soaked in rosewater, salted bread wrapped in black cloth, a lock of red hair braided with a baby's tooth. Daniel tried to return them, but by dusk more would appear, and always poppy seeds. Leah began humming, not songs, but fragments, pieces of lullabies stitched together from the dreams of strangers. Some sounded familiar, almost. Others were foreign and dissonant, in a tongue her lips weren't supposed to know. She hummed while she cooked, while she brushed her hair, while she stood in the field and stared at nothing. One evening, Daniel found her by the poppies. She had knelt beside them, whispering. "What are you doing?" he asked. Leah looked up, eyes unfocused. "They're listening," she said. Then more quietly, "She's listening." That night, the house creaked in strange rhythms. Boards groaned, walls shifted, the wind sang through the chimney in verses. Daniel tried not to listen, but then he heard it from the bedroom. A lullaby, soft, repeating, not from Leah, from the cradle, the one he had burned. He ran upstairs. The cradle was there, again, exactly where it had always been. Only now, there was something inside it. He didn't look. He couldn't. He slammed the door shut and locked it, but he still heard it breathing. In the morning, the door was open. The cradle was gone. Only a smear of soil remained across the floorboards, like something had dragged itself out during the night. Leah made tea as if nothing had happened. She served it to Daniel with shaking hands. And in his cup floated 3 small poppy petals. She began sleepwalking again, but this time it wasn't just her body that moved. It was the earth beneath her. Daniel followed her one night, not through the field, but into the forest behind the house. The path twisted, unfamiliar. Trees leaned too close, their trunks groaning. Somewhere deeper, a child's voice cried once and then fell silent. He found her at the base of an ancient tree, roots wide and split like open mouths. She stood between them, arms raised, in whispering into the hollow like it was a confessional. Then she turned, and her eyes were completely black. Daniel confronted the villagers. "Something's wrong with her," he shouted. "She needs help." But the butcher only closed his stall early. The grocer barred the door. And the old woman who once gave them bread said gently, "She's becoming." Leah stopped eating. She only drank herbal water, bitter, dark, laced with seeds. She stopped sleeping in bed. She preferred the floor, the cold. Sometimes Daniel found her curled beneath the window, murmuring names he didn't know. Names of women: Iskra, Marta, Ileana. All mothers who had no children. All names no longer spoken. Then came the night of the red moon. It rose over the hills like an open wound, casting no warmth, only color. The poppies in the field shivered, their stems twitching in unison. Leah stood in the center, arms outstretched, dressed in white, her dress slowly turning crimson from the hem upwards, as if the earth itself were staining her. Daniel ran to her, tried to pull her away, but her feet would not move. They were rooted, planted, and from her lips came a lullaby not meant for any living child, a lullaby meant for the field. He dragged her back to the cottage. She wept, but not for herself, for the one still waiting, she said. Daniel tried to hold her, tried to pray, but the prayer slid off the walls like oil. The house no longer answered to God. The next day, the cradle returned. Only this time, it didn't appear in the bedroom. It grew in the field, half submerged in the soil, like a tree that had bloomed wrong, its frame splintered but alive, wrapped in red thread and crawling with worms. Leah stood before it for hours. Daniel begged her not to go near it. She didn't reply. She only whispered, "It's almost time." The village changed again, but this time it did not try to hide it. Doors were marked in red chalk. Threads were tied across windows like spider webs. Smoke rose in careful spirals from every chimney, carrying scents not from any kitchen. Scorched herbs, bitter roots, the unmistakable burn of blood and salt. They called it the offering season, but never in front of Daniel. Only in whispers, only when Leah walked past. Children were kept indoors. Even the stray dogs vanished. There were no songs in the air, no bells, just the steady sound of wind threading through the valley, and the slow, patient hum of the field, like it was waiting for something to ripen. Leah walked it every day, at dawn, at dusk, sometimes past midnight, barefoot and silent, her eyes wide and vacant, her lips mouthing lullabies only the soil could understand. Daniel followed once. She didn't notice, or maybe she did and didn't care. At the center, the cradle had grown. Now fully risen from the earth, it looked carved from bone and bark. It rocked gently, though no breeze touched it. From inside came a sound not unlike a breath or a heartbeat. Daniel reached out. Leah turned to him, suddenly awake, her voice low and strange. "Don't touch it," you're not the one it wants." That night he dreamed of cradles, dozens of them, stacked beneath the house, buried beneath the field, hanging from the trees like fruit. Each one held a bundle, not quite a child, not quite a corpse. Each one cried, and each one whispered his wife's name. The village feast came without warning. Tables were set in the square, lanterns were hung, women wore white, men stood silent, children watched from windows, their eyes wide and hollow. Leah was dressed for the occasion, not by her husband, but by the women of the village. They arrived at the house just after dusk, silent, smiling, carrying fabric and oils and combs made from antler. Daniel protested. They didn't speak to him. They took Leah's hand, and she followed without question. When she returned hours later, her skin gleamed with something that smelled of poppy and iron. Her hair was braided with red thread. Her dress, white linen, had a circle of black stones sewn into the hem. And her eyes were wrong, too calm, too empty. The feast was unlike anything Daniel had seen. No laughter, no dancing, no toasts. Just food, mostly bread, salted meat, roots carved into infant shapes, and songs that no one sang aloud, just hummed, low, repetitive, ancient. Leah sat at the head of the table. He wasn't allowed to sit beside her. Only mothers were. Daniel stood behind the crowd watching. A man came to him, the first to speak directly to him in days. Tall, thin, eyes too dark. He said, "Every harvest must be sown." Daniel asked what that meant. The man smiled, almost tenderly. "The field takes grief, but it gives life. It always gives life." Then he handed Daniel a cup. Inside was wine, or so it looked, but it smelled like earth, like roots torn fresh, like old blood. Daniel didn't drink it. He dropped the cup and walked away. It shattered. No one flinched. That night, Leah did not come home. He found her in the field, curled beside the cradle like a mother guarding her infant. She was humming again. The melody made his teeth ache. When he tried to lift her, she resisted, not with force, but with sadness. "I can't leave it alone," she whispered. "It's hungry." The next morning, a child arrived at the cottage. A girl, silent, barefoot. She held a doll, a straw figure bound in red thread, with a poppy stitched where the heart should be. She handed it to Leah, then turned and walked away. Leah wept, but not for the girl. She wept like a mother hearing her dead baby cry for the first time in years. Daniel burned the doll, but it didn't catch fire. It only smoldered and screamed. He buried the pieces in the woods. The next day, they were back on the porch, whole, smiling. The cradle in the field grew again, now surrounded by a circle of poppies so thick they looked like fire. Inside the cradle, linen, red-stained and pulsing. It breathed in rhythm with Leah's body, though she was still standing several feet away. Daniel watched in horror. "This is not healing, this is possession," he told her. She turned to him slowly. "No, this is motherhood." The villagers began calling her blessed. The priest, the second one, older, braver, came to intervene. He walked into the field with his Bible raised high. He called it heresy. He called it pagan filth. He shouted verses to the sky. Then the soil opened beneath him, just slightly. just enough to take his right leg. He screamed as the earth crushed bone. Daniel pulled him out. He survived, but he never spoke again, only whimpered lullabies in the hospital until he died 3 days later from shock or memory. Leah stopped answering to her name. She began referring to herself as the Hollow. Daniel begged her to leave with him, to go far away, to forget this place, to forget the child they lost, to remember who they were. She cupped his face with a tenderness he hadn't felt in months. We were never meant to be parents. We were meant to be vessels. And she kissed his forehead. He wept. She tasted his tears. The field knows. It chose me, she whispered. The poppies reached their peak bloom that night. The moon returned, low, red and wide, and in the cradle, something shifted, moved, cried. Not a wail, not human, just a sound, like breath finding form. Daniel ran into the house, barricaded the doors, sat on the floor shaking. And still he heard the lullaby, through the walls, through the soil, through Leah's voice, and something else's. The morning after the cradle cried, Leah woke with red on her hands. Not from outside, from within. Her palms were raw, marked by thin, perfect lines, as though something had been stitched into her skin and pulled back out again. Daniel tried to clean them, but the blood kept weeping through the bandages. By nightfall, new lines had appeared, longer, deeper, following a pattern he didn't understand, until he looked closely and realized it was the shape of the cradle. She didn't seem in pain. In fact, she looked lighter, as though something had been carved out of her, some burden finally removed. Daniel begged her to go to a hospital. She smiled softly and said, "I am being healed." He screamed at her. He wept in front of her. He fell to his knees. And still she looked at him like a woman looking through glass. "You'll understand soon," she whispered. "Grief is not something to escape. It's something to grow." The next day, Leah wasn't at the cottage. Daniel searched the field, but she wasn't there either. He found her in the chapel, kneeling before the hidden altar. The fosse wall had been removed. Behind it stood a statue, crude, faceless, carved from black stone. A woman, empty arms, open mouth. Her belly was hollowed out like a basin. Inside, dried blood, bones of birds, teeth too small to be adult. Leah was chanting. Her voice was not her own. He dragged her from the chapel. She didn't resist, but she left a smear of blood on the altar as she went, and as they walked away, Daniel heard something behind them, a cradle creaking from inside the walls. That night, he locked all the doors, barred the windows, burned every red thread he could find. He held Leah as she slept, her body warm but distant, like holding a memory instead of a woman. And then he dreamed, not of her, not of their lost child, but of a gathering, a ring of women, weeping, clothed in white, each holding a doll made of straw, bleeding from the eyes, each chanting the same phrase, "Only grief can feed the field, only sorrow can make it bloom." When he awoke, Leah wasn't at the cottage. Again, But this time, the trail was clear. A line of blood dripped down the stairs, out the front door, into the field. Daniel followed, through dew, through poppies, through breath that wasn't his own. He found her kneeling beside the cradle, arms outstretched. Both her palms bled freely now, the cuts split open like mouths. Inside the cradle was no longer cloth. Something inside it moved, shifting, kicking, breathing. He saw a face, only for a moment. Not human, not beast, not child, something in between, and he screamed. Leah didn't flinch. She sang to it, softly, lovingly. Later, in the barn, Daniel found Leah's old journals. She hadn't written in them for months, but now they were full again, page after page. The handwriting was not hers. It was smaller, slanted, ancient, and every page read the same phrase: one must mourn, one must give, one must stay. And beneath each phrase, a name: Iskra, Marta, Eliane, Lena. All women, all lost. He went to Luda, the old woman in the woods, the only one who had ever answered a question without lying. She was waiting. She always seemed to be waiting. He demanded truth. She poured him tea and said, "Each bloom takes one." He stared at her hollow. She continued, "When the poppies bloom red and wrong, we must give one mother whose arms are empty, one who still hears the cry, one who is willing to bleed." He shook his head. "They die?" Luda smiled, the saddest smile he'd ever seen. "No, they become." He left her house with shaking hands and a scream trapped in his throat. That night he tried to leave. He packed their bags, started the car, begged Leah to come with him. She sat in the passenger seat, silent, until they reached the edge of the village, where the road curved away into the woods. There, standing in the road, were the villagers, all of them, blocking the path. No torches, no weapons, just stillness. And behind them, a child, silent, bleeding from the palms, cradling a doll made of dirt. He slammed the brakes, turned the car around. Back at the cottage, Leah walked inside without a word. The cradle was waiting in the living room, fresh soil scattered across the floor, and a lullaby playing from nowhere. Daniel wept. Leah kissed his forehead and whispered, "I had understood. It didn't take our baby. It heard me grieving, and it answered." She didn't sleep that night. She stood outside until dawn, both her hands raised, blood dripping into the soil, her body shivering with something too old to be cold. And when the sun rose, the cradle rocked, and inside, something began to laugh. Not joyfully, not cruelly, just hungrily.
The cradle was no longer just an object. It was a presence. It no longer sat in the field. It rooted there. The earth had begun to reshape itself around it, lifting slightly as if forming a cradle for the cradle. The poppies had withered and blackened overnight, their petals curled like scorched paper. In their place, sprouts emerged, thin red vines, veined with black, pulsing slowly like arteries beneath the soil. Daniel watched from the window. Each morning it had changed, taller, wider, hungrier, and inside it, something grew. He tried to photograph it once, snapped a picture from the edge of the field, hand trembling, phone raised. When he looked at the image, it was all static, red, nothing but red. When he looked up again, the cradle was rocking by itself, back and forth, as though soothed, as though fed. He confronted the villagers, screamed at them, demanded they do something, stop it. They said nothing. Until one man, a carpenter with gray hair and milky eyes, placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder and said gently, "She chose the field. It remembers her grief. It will remember yours." He hit him. No one intervened. No one spoke. They only watched him leave. He returned to the field that night with gasoline and matches. Leah wasn't home. The village was asleep, and the cradle stood alone. He stepped over the black stones, over the faded red thread. The air was colder near it, but not dead. It pulsed with life, rotten and sacred, a wrong kind of holiness. He poured the gasoline, every drop. He struck a match. The flame danced in his hand, then went out. The wind didn't blow. It was snuffed. Another match. Same result. The third burned long enough to drop, but when it hit the cradle, nothing. No smoke, no fire. Only a low sound like the creak of a rocking chair buried in stone. Then something rose from the base of the cradle, a small vine. It reached toward Daniel's hand, fast, too fast. It grazed his wrist, and he felt everything. Every cradle buried beneath the earth, every child lost, every mother who screamed, every lullaby ever offered to the soil. It was inside him, clawing, singing, feeding. He tore away, fell back into the dirt, heaving, sobbing, bleeding from the nose. And above him, the cradle rocked, faster now. He ran home. Leah was waiting for him at the door. She didn't speak. She touched his wrist. The mark was already there. 3 small red lines, braided like thread. The next day, he boarded up the house, not to keep the villagers out, to keep the field in. But it was useless. The walls creaked with lullabies. The windows wept red condensation. The attic smelled of roots, and in the floorboards he could hear it, the cradle, rocking, even when no one was near it, even when it wasn't there. He found Leah sitting in the bathtub, fully clothed. The water dyed red, not from wounds, from poppy ink. She smiled up at him. "It touched you, didn't it?" He shook. "You let it happen." She nodded. "Now it will remember you, too." That night, the cradle grew arms. He saw them, branches that twisted from its base, forming curved limbs that swayed as it rocked. Not mechanical, organic, wet, waiting. One of them held a cloth bundle, swaddled tight. Daniel approached. The bundle twitched, and something cooed. He didn't scream. He simply walked backward until he fell into the mud. The cradle didn't stop rocking. The arm didn't let go of the bundle. Inside the house, the television turned on by itself. The screen glowed red, then static, then black, then a single word in handwritten white. Mama. Daniel unplugged the set. It stayed on. The next morning, Leah laid a hand on his chest while he slept. He awoke choking. not from her weight, from soil. In his mouth, his throat, his lungs. He coughed it up onto the sheets, wet, black earth, seeded with tiny red threads. She smiled. "It's almost ready," she said. "The bloom, the breath, the birth." He curled away from her, but she only kissed the back of his neck. "You'll be a father soon." That afternoon, he broke into the town records, desperate, looking for anything, anyone who had left the village after losing a child. There were none. No death certificates for infants, only women marked as departed. No bodies, no graves, only names. Leah's journal had contained them all, and on the final page, beneath the last name, a blank space. No words, no ink, but Daniel knew. It was waiting for Leah. He confronted Luda again. This time he didn't plead. He screamed. He begged her to undo it, to unmake whatever was happening. She stared at him for a long time. Then she said, "You asked for healing. You came here to grieve. We gave you a garden." He shook his head. "It's not life. It's not human." Her eyes dimmed. "Nor is grief, but it grows just the same." That night he dug. In the center of the field, beside the cradle. He dug for hours. His hands blistered. His fingers bled. But he unearthed it. Another cradle, buried, rotted, still rocking. Inside, Owns, tiny, curled, still wearing thread, still humming when he touched them. He screamed until his throat tore, and still, the earth did not shake. It only sighed. Leah met him at the edge of the field. Her dress was soaked in blood and soil, her belly round, full, alive, but he knew. There was no child inside, only roots, only thread, only something else. She cupped his cheek. "It touched you." And behind her, in the cradle, the bundle unwrapped itself, and a mouth opened, too wide, too red, too full of teeth. The bread was warm, soft, fragrant. Daniel hadn't smelled anything that familiar in weeks, not since the fields turned black, not since the cradle took root in their lives. It was on the table when he woke, a perfect loaf, steam rising like breath. Leah stood at the stove, humming. Her dress was damp. Her arms were red to the elbows. She smiled as he approached. "Sit," she said. "Eat before it cools." Her voice was light, lilting, like it had once been. For a moment, he forgot everything. He sat. He ate. The first bite was strange. Not bitter, not wrong, just unfamiliar. The texture of something threaded through the dough, faintly metallic. Leah watched him with gentle eyes. "Do you like it?" she asked. Daniel nodded. He took another bite, then a third, but halfway through the slice, he froze. There was something in his mouth. He reached in, fingers shaking, and pulled it out. A single red thread, still wet, still warm. He looked at her. Her smile never changed. "It needed to rise with blood," she said softly. Daniel was sick for 3 days. His body rejected everything. Water, light, words. He shivered in bed, soaked in sweat and nightmares. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the cradle again, not in the field, but inside him, nestled in the cavity behind his ribs, rocking slowly, grinding bone into dust. Leah never left his side. She wiped his face with cool cloths. She fed him sips of tea, always bitter, always red. And she sang to him, lullabies he never knew, lullabies that made the walls hum. On the fourth night, he stopped breathing. Just for a moment, but long enough. He felt himself slip, away, down, beneath the earth. He saw roots stretching through centuries of graves. He saw mothers on their knees clawing at the dirt, pressing their foreheads to the stones. He saw the cradle, open-mouthed, waiting, and he heard it speak. One must feed, one must bleed, one must stay. He awoke with a scream. Leah held him tightly. Her eyes were no longer her own. That morning the villagers came. They didn't speak. They brought bread, dozens of loaves, some shaped like cradles, some braided with red thread, some still warm. Leah opened the door for them, silent and smiling. They set the loaves in the kitchen, then bowed to her, and left without a word. Daniel didn't eat any of it, but Leah did, bite after bite, slowly, ritually, and as she chewed, she wept. That night, Daniel dreamed of ovens, massive, black, burning low. Inside them, the loaves cried. They had mouths, and they sang lullabies in shrill, scorched voices. When he reached to open the door, a small hand grabbed his wrist, a child's hand, cold, rooted, and from the dark behind the oven, he heard Leah say, "It takes our grief, it bakes it, and we eat what's left of ourselves." He tried to leave again, alone. He drove for hours, but every road circled back. The signs changed, the forest thickened, time folded, and when he blinked, he was back at the cottage. Leah was waiting on the porch, holding a loaf, still warm, still bleeding. He ran into the woods, screamed until his throat tore, fell to his knees, then found himself face to face with the priest's grave, the second one, the brave one. Only it wasn't a grave anymore. It was a cradle, half submerged, with a black collar inside, and a tongue nailed to its side. He ran again. The forest laughed. The trees whispered lullabies. The path led him home. It always did. The villagers began preparing the altar. In the chapel. In the open. No more secrecy. They painted symbols on the stone. Not crosses, not saints, but spirals and threads and empty wombs. They brought offerings of cloth dolls filled with teeth. They smeared the cradle with red clay and ash. Leah stood before it, arms open, and the people sang. It was not a song of joy. It was a song of debt. He begged her again to stop, to run, to forget. She cupped his face. Her voice was tender. "You asked for peace." He shook his head. "Not this." Tears filled her eyes. "There's no such thing as peace for the grieving." She placed a kiss on his lips. It tasted like iron. That night he found his name sewn into her pillow, stitched in red thread 3 times. Above it a phrase, "Father of the one who came after," and below it, "He who must watch." He burned the pillow. The smoke spelled the lullaby in the air. The cradle in the field no longer rocked. It breathed. Its shape had changed, no longer wood, now a woven nest of flesh and vine and splintered bone. Inside it, a heartbeat, too loud, too strong, too wrong. He approached once. It growled. The next morning, Leah had no shadow. None.
Daniel watched as she walked across the porch. Sunlight touched her skin, but cast nothing behind her, not even a flicker. When he reached for her, she pulled away. "I gave it to the Cradle," she whispered. "A trade." He wept. She smiled. "We only need one soul between us." The bread was still on the table, always warm, always bleeding. He threw it away each day. Each day it returned. Leah called it communion. Daniel called it damnation. But he still ate it. He had to, because without it, he stopped dreaming. And when he didn't dream, the Cradle came to wake him up.
The statue wasn't always there. Daniel had been in the chapel many times, when it was cold, when he prayed, when he cried. There had never been a statue behind the altar, only an empty wall. But one morning, when he stepped inside, the wall was gone. In its place stood a woman carved in dark stone, faceless, featureless, yet somehow familiar. Her hands were outstretched, her belly was a hollow bowl, her head bowed. And beneath her feet, cradles, dozens of them, stacked, half-formed, buried in her pedestal like roots. Leah stood before her, barefoot, whispering, as if in prayer or confession. He approached carefully. She didn't turn to him, but she spoke. She was the first. Daniel swallowed. First what? Leah raised her hand to the stone woman's belly. It was filled with dried blood and poppy petals. Small bones nestled in the petals like seeds. The first mother, she said softly. The one who offered herself, holy, body, soul, name. Daniel stepped closer. The statue's wrists were wrapped in red thread, its mouth carved into an open oval, a silent lullaby. He touched the stone. It was warm. The villagers called her Saint Hollow. No one would say who built the statue. No one would say how long it had been there. But they left offerings at her feet. Feathers, teeth, hair wrapped in cloth. Even Daniel's photograph, one of Leah, pregnant and smiling, taken the week before they lost the baby, was now sitting at the base of the statue, folded once, edges curled, eyes scratched out. He took it and burned it in front of them. No one protested. Only Leah frowned. She liked that one. He tried to move the statue. He came at night with rope and tools and fury in his chest. But as soon as he touched her again, the candles flared. The cradle outside began to creak, faster, faster, violently, like it would shatter. And Leah appeared in the doorway, eyes wide, voice hollow. You don't pull down a saint, you listen. He dropped the rope. That night, Leah sat in front of the statue with the bowl in her lap. She filled it with dirt, then blood, her own from her palms, then threads from her dress, from her pillow, from Daniel's socks. She stirred it with a spoon of bone, and she spoke. Not in English, not in any language Daniel had ever heard. The statue listened, and then it answered, not aloud, not in echo, but in movement. Its arms lowered just slightly, its hands now pointing to Leah's belly. She wept. She held her stomach like something had just kicked. He dragged her from the chapel. She screamed, not in fear, but in grief. Why would you take her away again? She sobbed. He held her close, trembling. There is no her, Leah. She pushed him away. There was,
And now there is again. She smiled through her tears. Don't you feel her? He didn't answer. But later, when he lay alone in bed, he did feel something. Tiny, fluttering, deep inside his bones. The village changed. They no longer avoided Daniel. They welcomed him, quietly, hands on his shoulders, soft blessings whispered in old tongues. They treated him like a father waiting for a miracle, but their eyes betrayed them. There was no joy in them, only pity and guilt and reverence, as if they already knew what he would lose. The midwife came, old, barefoot, blind in one eye. She brought herbs and oils and smoke. She examined Leah. She never touched her, only hovered her hands above the belly and nodded. She is full, but not of flesh, of sorrow made flesh. He shook his head. You mean possessed? The midwife smiled. No, blessed. He dug into the chapel records, books beneath books, faded parchment, ink smeared with time and weeping. He found mention of Saint Hollow, her real name lost, but the legend remained. A woman who could not bear children, a woman who made a deal with the field. She planted blood, sowed pain, fed the soil with lullabies and grief. In return, the village flourished, and each spring a childless woman was offered in her honor to keep the fields blooming. They called it the mother's rebirth, but it was never rebirth. It was replacement. Leah began to draw, dozens of pages, cradles, roots, wombs made of thread, a woman screaming into the dirt, a man standing alone, watching it happen, unable to stop it. Daniel knew the man. He had his eyes, his hands, his fear. He confronted her, begged her, screamed, "Don't let them take you!" She touched his cheek. "They aren't taking me," she whispered. "I am giving." He sobbed into her chest. "I can't lose you." She rocked him slowly, like a child. "You already did, the day the heartbeat stopped. I just stayed behind." That night, the statue wept, real tears, red as poppy wine. They trickled down its stone cheeks. He touched them. They burned. The skin on his fingers blistered, and somewhere behind him, the cradle moaned. The final straw came when he opened the fridge. There was no food, only red thread, coiled on every shelf, wrapped around the milk carton, piercing the eggs like threads, through the butter like veins. And in the center, a note. Fesh must fast, grief must feast. He slammed the door, and the cradle, from the field, screamed. Leah didn't sleep that night. She sat outside, staring at the statue through the chapel window. She sang lullabies that had no end, only loops, like red threads spun into a noose. And as Daniel watched her, he realized she was no longer his wife. She was no longer a woman. She was becoming a prayer. And the field was listening.
They called it the communion. But there was no priest, no scripture, no altar of gold. Only thread, red thread, woven across doorways, tied around wrists, hung from tree branches in perfect loops. No knots, no ends, just endless circles, as if even time had been stitched into obedience. Leah wore it like a veil. It hung from her hair, her dress, her fingertips. It trailed behind her in long ribbons that never touched the ground. The villagers followed her like pilgrims, and Daniel stood at the window, watching, unable to stop any of it. The feast began at dusk, tables arranged in a spiral in the village square. At the center, the cradle, not the one from the field, a replica, woven entirely of red thread, no base, no support, just tension holding weight, floating inches above the ground, swaying gently with breathless rhythm. Around it, bread, dolls, blood in bowls of carved bone, and mothers, only mothers. Men were forbidden near the center. They watched from the perimeter, silent, reverent, hollow. Daniel stood among them, but none would meet his gaze. Leah sat in the first circle. She was dressed in white, the red thread sewn across her chest in the shape of a cradle. Her belly was round, impossibly so, though only weeks ago she had been flat and empty. Now she glowed with something that pulsed beneath the skin. Not a child, not life, but something close enough to lie. The women began humming, low, unified, circular like the thread itself. They passed bread, they drank from the bowls, they kissed Leah's hands one by one, and after each kiss, a new mark appeared on her skin, tiny pinpricks of blood, as if her body was stitching itself into theirs. Daniel pushed forward. A hand stopped him. It was the carpenter, the one he'd hit weeks before. Now he looked at Daniel with something like sympathy. "Don't interrupt," he said. "You'll tear the seam." Leah's voice joined the hum. Her eyes closed, her palms lifted. The thread around her body began to tighten, not strangling, but binding. Each loop pulled closer to her skin, pressing gently into her veins like vines that knew where grief lived. And then the thread moved on its own, winding, weaving, stretching outward from her chest. It reached the center of the spiral, the thread cradle, and entered it. Daniel gasped. He saw it now. The cradle wasn't empty, not anymore. Inside was a bundle of fabric, swaddled, still, breathing. The thread wrapped around it, and the bundle shuddered. The villagers began to weep, not dramatically, not loudly, just steady tears, all at once, like mourning had been rehearsed, practiced into perfection. Daniel backed away. The air grew heavier, thicker, like soup made from rot and ritual. Leah opened her eyes. They were all red. No iris, no white, only red. Not painted, but dyed, thread-colored, cradle-born. She looked at Daniel and smiled. "You're in the spiral now," she whispered. "There's no outside anymore." He ran, past the tables, past the stairs, through the edge of the spiral. He reached the woods. The trees bent away from him, groaning. The soil was soft, too soft. He fell. His hands sank deep into the earth. And there, buried just beneath the surface, he felt them. Hands, hundreds of them, small, cold, thread-wrapped, reaching upward, not to pull him down, but to offer him something. A loop of thread, red. He screamed. He returned home, locked every door, blocked every window, sat in silence until the sun rose. When he finally stepped outside, The spiral was gone. No tables, no thread, no people, just silence. And one thing left behind, a doll, at his feet, made of straw, wearing a thread veil. Its chest was stitched with one word, Father. Leah came home that night. She was glowing. She didn't walk, she drifted. The thread was gone from her body, but something deeper had replaced it. A stillness, a knowing. She sat beside him and took his hand. "I'm ready," she said, "for the weaving." He didn't ask what that meant. He already knew. The next day, he tried to dig again, in the field, by the real cradle, but the soil would not move. Each shovelful vanished the moment he turned away. The dirt closed itself, refused to yield. He knelt beside the cradle and whispered, "Please." There was no answer, only a soft coo from the bundle inside. He lifted the blanket. Inside was not a child, but a mouth, circular, threaded with teeth. It whispered his name in Leah's voice. Then it bit him. He woke up screaming, only it wasn't a dream. The bite was still on his hand, still bleeding, and when he wrapped it, the cloth turned to red thread. The villagers held a second feast, smaller, private. This time, Leah led it. She stood beneath St. Hollow's statue, belly full, arms open. They gave her a new name, She Who Remembers. And then they turned to Daniel, and they bowed, not in reverence, but in apology. That night, Leah lay beside him and placed his hand on her stomach. It moved beneath his palm, not a kick, a turning, a weaving, a coil unspooling slowly, like something spinning itself into form. She whispered, "Can you feel her sewing?" He pulled his hand away. "I feel something wrong." Leah closed her eyes. Wrong things are the only ones that survive here. At dawn, the red thread had spread across the porch, through the windows, wrapped around the chimney like a noose. Daniel stepped outside and looked to the field. The cradle was now enormous, towering, a cathedral of thread and bone. The bundle inside was gone, but something bigger had taken its place, still swaddled, still breathing, still growing. He turned to Leah. Her water had broken, but what spilled was not water. It was soil, wet, rich, threaded, the floor soaked with it. Leah only smiled. "It's time," she whispered. "The field is open."
It rained that night. Not water, but ash. Fine gray powder drifted from the sky like snowfall over a battlefield. It coated the roofs, the fields, the sleeping sheep, the empty cradles rotting beneath the chapel. And it coated Leah. She stood in the yard, arms lifted, mouth open, letting the ash melt on her tongue. Daniel begged her to come inside. She didn't move. "It's part of the blooming," she said softly. "It feeds the roots." She looked down at her belly and smiled. "She's nearly here." Inside, the house was rotting. The floors had warped. The walls sweated red. The mirrors no longer reflected. Daniel tried to keep track of the days, but time was bending, folding in on itself like thread pulled too tight. Morning and night blurred, Meals went untouched. The clocks had all stopped at 3:03 a.m. And outside, the cradle had cracked open. Not broken, split, its sides peeling back like petals, revealing something that glowed from within, a pulsing, breathing seed, thick with veins and red light. The villagers gathered around it nightly. They didn't speak. They only knelt. They only waited. Daniel tried to run one last time. He packed what little they hadn't burned, dragged Leah to the car. She didn't fight, but the moment they reached the edge of the village, the engine stalled. All the lights flickered, the trees groaned and bent forward, and from the rearview mirror, Daniel saw a trail of thread unwind from Leah's dress and wrap around the steering wheel, binding it, holding it still. He cut the thread with his knife. It bled. Leah whispered, "She doesn't want to leave." They walked back in silence, Leah humming, Daniel shaking. The ash fell heavier now, forming drifts against the fence posts like snow in a dead winter. When they returned, the front door was wide open. Inside, poppies everywhere, blooming from the walls, the cabinets, the ceilings. Their petals pulsed, their roots hummed, and in the center of the kitchen, the cradle, the real one, dragged in from the field, still slick with soil and thread. It rocked, empty, for now. Daniel had a lecture to prepare for. He said his wife and child would be safe at the birth center. He checked on his offers and waited for the morning. He tried to prepare for a test, but he was destroyed. He tried to convert his units into the currency of the locals, but he was destroyed. He pointed out that the birth center was in shambles. He tried to convince the others to accept his offer, but he was destroyed. The midwife arrived. No tools, no gloves, only a thread veil and a bowl of ash. She knelt beside Leah, pressed a poppy to her lips, sang, and Leah opened, not like flesh, like bark, splitting from sternum to navel, without blood, without pain. Inside her, there was no child, only roots, winding, pulsing, shaped like limbs, like arms, like a thing trying to remember how to be born. Daniel staggered back. The midwife looked at him. She said, "You must choose, stay or fray." He ran through the rain of ash, through the blackened trees, to the chapel, to the statue. He collapsed before St. Hollow, begged, cried, screamed. But the statue didn't move, didn't weep, didn't listen, only watched. And behind her, something cracked. The stone pedestal opened, and from within, another cradle. This one empty, this one with his name carved into the side. He ran again, to the field, to the great cradle, now massive, now pulsing, now breathing with every heartbeat in the village. It had split into ribs, curved upward into an arch. The center glowed, and inside something sat. Not a child, not a creature, a mother, but not Leah. A thing shaped like her, woven from grief, made of lullabies, mouth always open, whispering his name. He stumbled home. Leah lay still on the soil-soaked floor, the midwife gone, the cradle beside her, waiting, empty, and stitched into her chest, where her heart had once beat, was a thread, red, leading into the cradle. Daniel sobbed. Where is she? From the cradle, something shifted. A sound, a breath, a clicking of bone, and then a voice. Soft, familiar, not Leah's, not a child's, but something older, something born from sorrow itself. You've always had her. Daniel backed away, but the thread was in his hand now, leading from his palm to the cradle. He hadn't picked it up. It had picked him. The village bells rang, though they had not worked in years. A single chime, then silence, then the lullaby drifting through the air like ash, all around, all at once, a thread wrapping the whole world in quiet mourning. Daniel knelt. He had no choice. He looked into the cradle, and what stared back had his eyes and none of Leah's.
Leah didn't speak after that night. She breathed, she blinked, she moved. But whatever voice she once had, the voice that laughed, that cried, that said Daniel's name at 3 a.m. with trembling hands, was gone. She sat in the cradle now, not in it, not curled up like a child, but woven into it, her arms looped over the edges like branches, her hair trailing into the soil below. The red thread had wrapped itself around her spine. Her eyes stayed open. She watched everything and saw nothing. Daniel fed her spoonfuls of broth. She didn't swallow. Still, it vanished. He whispered stories to her, old ones, the night they lost the baby, the day she screamed into his chest until she fell asleep, the memory of her standing in the snow in bare feet, laughing. She didn't blink, but her skin moved, like something was breathing just beneath it. The cradle never stopped rocking, even without wind, even without hands. And each time it moved, a sound rose from the earth, low, rhythmic, like a drum buried beneath a funeral procession. The villagers called it the hollowing. They hung black cloth from their windows. Children were hidden. Bread was burned. And Leah became their center, their still point in a world unraveling. Daniel asked them if she could be saved. They didn't understand the question. "She is becoming," the seamstress said, fingers red with thread. "She is filling the emptiness." "But she's empty," Daniel snapped. The seamstress smiled. "That's how it works." The statue of St. Hollow cracked that night. Not shattered, not broken, just a hairline split running from her brow to her belly. And inside, when Daniel dared to look, was more thread, coiled, living, pulsing with grief. A single word was scratched beneath it. Again. Rain fell, real rain, cold, cleansing, but it washed nothing away. The cradle grew roots. Daniel saw them push through the floorboards, through Leah's ankles, anchoring her to the earth. She never cried out. She only opened her mouth, and from within came the lullaby, but not sung, whispered, like a secret no one should ever hear, and once heard, could never forget. Daniel ran from the house, fell to his knees in the mud. He clawed at his ears until they bled. Still, he heard it. He returned the next morning. The house was gone. Or rather, it had collapsed inward, as if something had drawn all its weight into the center. There was no roof, no walls, only the cradle. Leah still inside. And around her, a ring of soil, black and rich and wet, blooming with poppies, and dolls, hundreds of them.
each one bearing a single name. Leah's was at the center. Daniel's was beside it, but it had no face, only a red thread mouth. He carried her out, not to escape. He knew that was no longer possible. He just wanted her to feel air again, to see sky, to remember what life used to be. She didn't resist. She couldn't. She was light now, too light, as if her bones were empty, as if her womb had taken more than blood. It had taken substance. He laid her on the altar in the chapel. St. Hollow wept again. This time the tears were clear, but they burned his skin all the same. He asked the statue why. Why this? Why Leah? Why them? He heard nothing, only the lullaby, now in his own voice. That night the field bloomed, not poppies, not grass, thread, miles of it, unspooling from the earth like veins from a sleeping beast. It climbed the trees, wrapped the houses, slid into windows, and the villagers opened their mouths and welcomed it. Some wept, some laughed, some simply lay down and let it stitch them into the soil. They had waited so long. They had grieved so much. They needed to be remembered. Daniel stayed by Leah's side, held her hand, watched her chest rise and fall, and then stop. No gasp, no rattle, just stillness and silence, and then a sound from beneath the altar. The floor split, and from the darkness rose a new cradle, made of bone and sorrow, and in it a shape, swaddled, rocking, breathing. Not Leah, not their child, but the memory of both. He whispered her name, once, twice, no answer. He placed his hand on her chest. It was hollow, truly, utterly hollow. The womb was empty, the heart was gone, and in their place, thread, weaving itself in a slow, deliberate spiral, trying to build a new story from the pieces of the old. He kissed her forehead, and for a moment, just a moment, her lips moved, and she said, "She's waiting for you." The sky cracked open at dusk, not with lightning, but with light, red gold and pulsing, as if the heavens themselves were bleeding. The clouds rolled back in silence. No wind, no thunder, just the slow reveal of something massive and watching. The villagers stood in rows at the field's edge, heads bowed, mouths stitched shut with thread they'd woven themselves. Each bore a mark across their chest, a cradle drawn in ash, ringed with poppies, and in the center of the field, the great cradle had bloomed. It was no longer wood or thread or bone. It was a womb, open to the sky, glowing from within, its ribs curled like petals around something still forming, something alive, something ancient, something owed. Daniel stood alone now. His boots sank into soil so soft it wept. Leah was gone, not buried, not burned, but absorbed, her body hollowed out, her breath taken back into the earth. All that remained was her thread, wrapped around his wrist, tugging gently, leading him forward. He followed it, through the spiral paths carved in the poppy stems, through the breathless, waiting crowd, to the center, to the cradle, to the thing inside. He stopped before it and looked down. It was not his daughter. It had no face, no limbs, just the suggestion of a body, curled, fetal, made of grief spun into flesh. It pulsed with memory. It rocked itself, and it opened its eyes. Not Leah's, not his, just red, empty and knowing. He fell to his knees. He wept. He screamed her name into the dirt. Leah! 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 But only the poppies answered. They bent toward him, their petals brushing his cheeks like mouths offering comfort they didn't mean. And the cradle whispered, "You brought her here." He shook his head. "No, you mourned her. I loved her. You fed her." The cradle opened fully, its ribs split wide, its heartbeat echoing through the valley. Inside, not a child, but a cradle within a cradle, an infinite echo of loss, each one smaller, each one humming, each one with a name carved into its side. He saw Iskra, Marta, Elion, and then Leah, the final one, the smallest, rocking, silent, and beside it a space, uncarved, waiting, the shape of a man. He stepped back. The villagers hummed, low, unified. The field responded. Roots twitched. Soil rose and fell in time with the lullaby. He looked to the sky, that endless red eye, and whispered, "What do you want from me?" And the voice came, not from above, from beneath. Completion. He ran, through the spiral, through the ash, through the prayers of the mute. He stumbled into the chapel. St. Hollow stood as she always had, cracked, veined, patient, but now her arms were open, welcoming. Daniel approached the altar, slammed his fists against it. "Take me," he begged, "not her, not again." The statue wept, clear tears, but it did not move. Instead, the wall behind it split, and behind it, a door, thread-bound, marked with Leah's name and his, twined together, like lovers, like parents, like offerings. He opened it. Inside, dark, wet, womb-like. The walls pulsed. He stepped in. The door closed behind him, and silence fell. There was no path, only descent. The tunnel curved downward, breathing around him, echoing with lullabies sung in reversed tongues. As he walked, he passed memories, not visions, living fragments. His baby girl curled in the crib, Leah reading lullabies aloud with hope in her voice and sadness in her smile. The funeral, the empty nursery, the blood on the bathroom floor, the thread in her mouth. The thread in her mouth. He reached the bottom, and there it was, the final cradle, plain, unmoving, open, empty. A space carved in earth for one final grief, one final father. He understood now. The field didn't want Leah. It never wanted the child. It wanted what came after, the hollowing of a man who loved too deeply to forget. He stepped in, laid himself down, thread wrapped around his limbs, gently, lovingly. It sewed his heart shut, sewed his mouth closed, and as the earth closed over him, he heard her voice again. Leah, soft, sweet, calling from somewhere just out of reach. She's safe now. You can rest. Above the field, the cradle closed. The villagers fell to their knees. The ash stopped. The sky cleared. The soil turned gold. And from the spiral of thread woven into the earth, a poppy bloomed, single, bright, red.
Years passed. The village remained. Smaller, perhaps. Quieter. But still it breathed. Still it sang. Still it remembered. The field was lush now. Not cursed. Not feared. Children played at its edges, their laughter threading through the poppies like ribbons of sunlight. The soil was soft beneath their feet, forgiving. No one spoke of the cradle anymore, but no one entered the center of the field either, not even the children. They knew somehow, as all children do, that some silence isn't empty. Some silence is full of listening. A new couple moved into Ashthorne House. Strangers, outsiders. They came with soft smiles and sad eyes, carrying little but one another. No children, no photographs, just loss in their posture and longing in their silence. The villagers welcomed them, kindly, softly, the same way they always did, with hands that held too gently, with eyes that watched too long, with gifts on the porch, bread, herbs, poppy bundles tied with thread. They said, "Welcome, this is a good place, a peaceful place." And the couple, too tired to question peace, believed them. The woman's name was Mara. She smiled like someone trying to remember how. She walked the village each morning, passing the well, the chapel, the edge of the field. The black stones were still there, but the red thread had faded or gone underground. She paused at the field's edge often, felt it in her chest, a hum, a pull, a lullaby that never quite reached her ears, just beneath the sound of wind. At night, she dreamed of a rocking cradle, but she had never seen one, not since the hospital, not since the sterile hallway and the phrase, "no heartbeat," spoken in a voice too gentle to be real. Her husband said they came here to start over, to rest, but she knew better. They came here to bury something they couldn't carry anymore. Only, in this village, nothing stays buried. One evening, Mara wandered to the chapel. The doors stood open. Candles lit themselves as she entered, small flames swaying as if they knew her. She stepped toward the altar. St. Hollow stood as she always had, now whole again, repaired, but something in her eyes had changed. There was warmth there now, no sorrow, just memory. Mara stared into those empty knowing sockets and whispered, "Did you lose her too?" The wind blew through the windows. The statue did not answer, but beneath Mara's feet, the floor throbbed once, as if something deep in the ground had heard her and approved. That night, she woke in tears, her hands dirty, her nails caked with soil, and on her pillow, a single poppy bloomed, bright, red, and wrapped in thread.
Her husband found her the next morning standing in the middle of the field, barefoot, eyes closed, humming. He called to her. She didn't move. When he reached her, she looked at him and said, "I heard her crying." He tried to lead her back. She didn't resist. But as they walked away, the poppies leaned in the direction of her footsteps, as if to remember her. The cradle was never seen, not in daylight, not in shadow, but sometimes, in that moment between waking and sleep, Mara would hear it. A creak, a sigh, a hum from beneath the floorboards. She stopped being afraid of it. It was no longer grief. It was something else. Recognition. The feeling of being held by something older than pain. Something that did not want her joy, only her mourning. The village celebrated its bloom each spring. A single red poppy, grown at the field's center, was harvested and carried through the town in silence. No music, no prayers, only one phrase whispered from door to door. One must mourn. It was not warning. It was not threat. It was remembrance. Grief was a gift, offered, carried, woven into bread and lullabies. And in that village, it was honored. Years later, a child was born. Not Mara's, not any one woman's, but born nonetheless. Left at the chapel, wrapped in linen stitched with red thread. No one claimed her, no one named her, but she was kept, she was loved. And each time she cried, the field swayed gently, as if rocked by invisible hands. And sometimes she stared into the sky and laughed at nothing, as if someone was playing peekaboo from the clouds. She grew fast, wise, quiet. She played with the dolls the elders gave her, made of straw and thread, but she always drew her own. Cradles, always cradles. Some open, some closed, one drawn over and over again. A cradle split like a mouth, with a name carved in the side. Leah. When she was old enough to speak, she asked her caretaker, "Why does the earth sing?" The woman smiled, braided the child's hair, and whispered, "Because someone is still listening." And so the field remained, not cursed, not haunted, but alive, a memory stitched into earth, a prayer that never ended. Each spring it bloomed, and the villagers came, and one would weep, and one would be chosen, and the thread would begin again. Because some places aren't built to forget. Some places are cradles, and cradles must rock. At the center of the field where no one walked, one stone remained. Small, smooth, its face worn blank by wind and rain. But when the sun hit it just right, you could still see the faint outline of two names, twined, etched not in stone, but in sorrow. Leah, Daniel, and beneath them, in thread that never faded, one must mourn.